Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, I'm going to play the role of Howie Roseman for an entire episode simulating the Philadelphia Eagles 2025 offseason.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. Welcome into a Tuesday edition of the show, and you guys know what time it is. It's time for our annual offseason simulation episode. We've been doing this since we started Locked On Eagles back in 2018. I am going to play the role of Howie Roseman. I'm going to go through in-house free agent decisions. I'm going to go into the UFA pool. We're going to do a mock draft. We're going to make any sort of trades that we want to for the offseason. This is what I would do this offseason if I was Howie Roseman. Not what I think Howie will do, what he could do, but what I would personally do if I was the Philadelphia Eagles general manager. And this offseason, I will say, compared to the past few years, at least what I noticed when I was going through the simulation, it was a lot more controlled. I don't want to say it's more boring, but it's definitely safer. You're trying to run it back. Like this Eagles core, most of the dirty work, the big moves, they've already been made. Like most of the core is intact. Like the guys you need for a repeat run in 2025 are already in the building. This is just some it's a tune-up offseason, right? This is an offseason, though, that I will say is important. These kind of offseasons, Howie Roseman doesn't always have success. 2018, 2023, a year after the Super Bowl, it's difficult to have these kind of off seasons because a lot of guys are going to leave in free agency, and you do have to replace some players with some value signings and draft picks, and you got to make sure you hit on those players, and Howie hasn't always done that in the past. But the good news is there is a younger, more sustainable core already intact this year. So although it's an important free agency in a draft, it's an important offseason as a whole, it's not, I would say, as important as some of the past few years. And I noticed that going through this simulation that, yeah, I wouldn't say it's as sexy as the past few ones that we've done because, again, like they have a lot of the pieces in place they already need. But nonetheless, we still made a couple, I would say, notable free agent signings, made some big moves in our mock draft. Let's get into it. But we're going to start with our in-house free agent decisions. Here is who I decided to keep, and here's who I let walk out of the building. So the guys I decided to extend. Linebacker Zack Baun. I think this one's obvious. You guys have heard me on the past few episodes say, you cannot lose Zack Baun. I'm not going to be thrilled if Milton Williams is gone. It sucks that Josh Sweat is likely out the door. Mekhi Becton, it'd be nice if he came back as the right guard and took a team-friendly deal to keep this elite offensive line intact. But if any of those guys leave, I'm not going to really be that upset. Zack Baun is the one free agent this year that I will be upset if he leaves, especially with Nakobe Dean's injury. This is a first-team All-Pro linebacker that you cannot let walk out the door. Howie Roseman at his press conference today at the NFL Scouting Combine said that just because he hasn't done something in the past doesn't mean he won't do it in the future when talking about paying a linebacker. And that's a good sign because that's exactly what he did last year. He paid a running back for the first time. He drafted a cornerback in the first round for the first time. He turned around and drafted another cornerback in the second round for the second time in his career. So I believe Howie when he says that. And I think that's foreshadowing. And it's what he did last year. I think it's what he's going to do again. He knows the importance of keeping Zack Baun in the middle of this defense. He is the priority this offseason. So I gave Zack Baun a contract extension. I also was a little bit proactive with some other guys' contracts. Even though they're not UFAs this year, I did extend the contract of Cam Jurgens, who's making under $2 million this year. He replaced Jason Kelce to perfection in 2024. I thought he was great. I also extended Dallas Goedert and Jordan Davis. Dallas Goedert still has another year on his deal. I know there's injuries with Dallas every single year, but maybe that will bump down his value a little bit. They can meet in the middle when it comes to the contract. I don't think Goddard's going to want top 2 tight end money. I don't think the Eagles are going to be able to lowball him, though, either, because he is an elite talent coming off a legendary playoff run. So I think they'll have to meet in the middle. But even with the injuries, I would like to bring him back. He's 30 years old, still has a lot of football left in him. And then Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis is an interesting situation because He hasn't been who you traded up for in the first round of 2022. I don't think he's met that ceiling. But at the same time, this is a very important player on the defense that does the dirty work on 2 downs against the run. He is progressing as a pass rusher, had a big sack in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. I would try to get this deal done early so it's more team-friendly if Davis does end up breaking out next year. Jordan Davis, his 5th-year option, they need to decide by the spring if they want to take that on. That's going to be over $11 million on the books next year. Maybe they get an extension done, spread that out, make it a little more cost-effective to keep Jordan Davis. I think if Milton Williams walks out the door, Jordan Davis, is he going to replace that pass rush production? No, absolutely not. But you don't want to lose 2 young interior linemen to play next to Jalen Carter. So I do think an extension gets done with Jordan Davis, Cam Jurgens, and Dallas Goedert. Those are some of the proactive decisions that I made for future contracts. And then I did bring back some more low-key UFAs that are in-house. I brought back cornerback Isaiah Rodgers, and you'll see why it was important that I brought back Rodgers very shortly. And then I brought back linebacker Oren Burks and tackle Fred Johnson. Oren Burks, I actually think, is an important free agent re-signing because, again, like I said, Nakobe Dean's injury, that's going to leak into the 2025 season. He might not play until the second half of the year. Yeah, you have Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who I'm excited about in year 2. In this scenario, you do have Zack Baun coming back, but I would like to have Oren Burks as part of that rotation. Oren Burks, I thought, was really good in the playoffs, replacing Nakobe Dean. And I thought he was really good at the end of the regular season as well when he got minutes against the Cowboys and the Giants. I don't think he would cost all that much. I think Oren Burks is a guy that you should absolutely re-sign. Isaiah Rodgers is another guy that will probably have a bigger role or a chance to have a bigger role in 2025, depending on what happens with Darius Slay and a potential competition with Kelee Ringo. And then Fred Johnson is a really good backup tackle that can play on the left side, that can play on the right side. I thought this year when he had to come in for Lane Johnson, specifically that New Orleans Saints game week 3, he battled. And I think Fred Johnson is a locker room guy. The team loves him. I think he's a really good depth piece for Jeff Stoutland and the offensive line. So those are the guys that I extended in-house. Zack Baun, Cam Jurgens, Dallas Goedert, Jordan Davis, Isaiah Rodgers, Oren Burks, and Fred Johnson. The guys that I think I just had to let walk, Josh Sweat, after that Super Bowl performance, I just don't think the Eagles can afford him. I don't think he's going to be worth, as much as I'd like to have Sweat back in a vacuum, I don't think he's going to be worth the contract that he could command on the open market. I could totally see a team like the Arizona Cardinals, Jonathan Gannon, overpaying Josh Sweat. And then Milton Williams as well. This is a player smack dab in the middle of his prime, coming off a career year, an elite pass rushing defensive tackle. He's going to get $20+ million a year. I would like to try to make it work and bring Milton back this year. I'd be so excited if he was back in Philly, but I just don't think it's going to be very feasible, especially when you have to pay Jalen Carter next year. I did have to let Milton Williams go. And then Brandon Graham retires year 15, leaves with his second ring, ends his Eagles career perfectly. So Brandon Graham's gone, Josh Sweat, Milton Williams. And then these 3, it was a little bit more challenging. Mekhi Becton, I think in a vacuum, could be back in Philadelphia in 2025 if he's willing to sign a team-friendly deal. But I think the Eagles are going to be very disciplined. And in this scenario, I would be very disciplined in how much I offer Becton. Because although I'd love to have him back, I do think I would lowball him compared to what his open market value would be. And I don't know if he would accept the deal that I would offer because I know I have Jeff Stoutland who can turn water into wine when it comes to young offensive linemen. He can develop them into really good starters. I mean, he's done it with everybody, including Becton. So I think Tyler Steen's a good player that can be a solid starter next year. They can draft somebody. There might be a cheaper free agent that you can get. You can try another Mekhi Becton-like experiment with a player that's fallen out of favor with another team. Bring him into Stout University and try to develop him up. I would love to have Becton back, and if he's willing to come back on a very team-friendly deal, then sure, but I just can't feasibly have all 5 of your top offensive linemen that are starters be getting paid top 5, top 10 contracts. I don't think that's realistic, so I did have to let 3 of the top 4 free agents in-house walk. I kept Zack Baun, but I had to let go Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, and Mekhi Becton. Brandon Graham retires. And then I let Kenneth Gainwell go. I think he's going to find better opportunities with other teams to get more carries, to get more overall snaps. I really like Will Shipley, and I think they can draft somebody to replace Gainwell. Darius Slay was an interesting case. Slay was a tough one because I thought he had an underrated rejuvenation season in 2024 at age 34. He wants to play one more year, and maybe you bring him back and let him have his farewell tour like BG did this past year, and I think he'd still be very effective next year. But I don't think the drop-off with Isaiah Rodgers or Kelee Ringo would be that significant. And with Darius Slay last year, he just came on and off the field all year long. Like, he just could. It was very Jason Peters 2019, 2020-esque, where he just couldn't finish games, right? And I think he made some huge plays every time he was out there, and he was big in that playoff run. Like, Darius Slay, don't get it twisted. He was an instrumental part of this team last year, and he is a captain. He is under contract, so I would understand why the Eagles bring him back. But again, he was injured a lot, and I don't think there's a huge drop-off with younger options in Kelee Ringo and Isaiah Rodgers. Rodgers played well last year when he was in the game, and I think Kelee Ringo is still somebody that can be a long-term, high-end starter. This guy is only 23 years old. He's younger than Quinyon Mitchell. I love the tape he put on in 2023 at the end of the year. I thought he grew tremendously this year as a physical player, as a tackler, as a gunner on special teams. I know that Vic Fangio liked Rodgers better as a rotational piece coming in for Slay, but the Eagles gave up a future third-round pick for Ringo for a reason, and I want to see him get a shot this year. And so I'm going to let Darius Slay walk in this scenario. But I was very hit or miss with that. Like, it could have went either way, and I wouldn't have been too upset. If Darius Slay's back next year, I think it makes total sense, but I'd rather get out of that contract 1 year too early than 1 year too late. So I let Darius Slay go and Kenneth Gainwell as well. All right, guys, we'll get into my unrestricted free agency decisions coming up next. It's the 2025 offseason simulation right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, we continue on I think this is the 8th annual offseason simulation episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Yeah, it's number 8, which is crazy. Time has absolutely flown by. So I'm playing the role of Howie Roseman. I am simulating the Eagles offseason, going through what moves I would make with in-house free agents, unrestricted free agency, mock drafts, trades, going through it all. Let's just recap what I did with in-house free agency. So I extended Zack Baun, Cam Jurgens, Dallas Goedert, Jordan Davis, Isaiah Rodgers, Oren Burks, and Fred Johnson. Who walked out the door? Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Brandon Graham to retirement, Mekhi Becton, Darius Slay, and Kenneth Gainwell. A lot of talent from your Super Bowl win that are leaving. Unfortunately, that is reality. I think when it's time for Howie to make these moves, 2 or 3 of those guys could be back. I could absolutely see Becton back and Darius Slay. I could see there being a scenario where they do find a way to pay Milton Williams. But for me, I did have to let those guys go. I think it's a loaded draft class for defensive linemen. And I'm still a believer in Kelee Ringo, and I think Isaiah Rodgers was pretty good last year when he played, and he is only 27 years old. So I chose to bring him back instead of bringing back Darius Slay. So when it comes to the UFA pool, this year it's not great. Like, it's not a sexy free agent class. Like, I don't think there's going to be the big names thrown around as there has been the last few years. I don't think teams are going to be as aggressive throwing money around for a lot of these UFAs, especially the Eagles. Most of their decisions, as you could see, are coming from inside the building. Their decisions this year, they're mostly in-house. But they do have some money to work with. Right now, it looks like estimated around $20 to $25 million in cap space. The specific number over the cap has them projected at a little over $22 million in cap space. They do have some money to spend. If they lose Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, guys like Mekhi Becton and Darius Slay, I think most of the replacements will come through the draft within the next year or two. But there are some guys in free agency that I do like that can be cheaper options to replace those players. I like the idea of targeting, and I don't want to do what Howie did in 2018, 2019, these Band-Aid moves of older veterans that are cheap, like a Malik Jackson. I don't want to take that route. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to go for the bridge, the Band-Aid guys. Like, that's not the Anthony Harris's in 2021. Like, miss me with that kind of stuff. But what they should target, even though it didn't work last year, is our Bryce Huff type of free agents, like ascending young players that still haven't hit their ceiling, and so you can get them maybe a year early, and boom, you get them on a bargain contract. Like, I do think Howie Roseman's logic with Bryce Huff did make sense. He just missed on it. But I do like trying that again because it has worked for the Eagles in the past. It worked with Hassan Reddick right before Bryce Huff. Like, he was trying to replicate the Hassan Reddick strategy by bringing in Bryce Huff. And by the way, I'm going to address the Bryce Huff situation coming up on the show, but I do like that idea again. And there's a couple options that might not be significant downgrades for Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, and they're a lot cheaper. And so a potential option that I brought in free agency to replace Milton Williams to add to the rotation with Jordan Davis and Moro Ijoma and potentially a draft pick is Kansas City Chiefs defensive tackle Tershawn Wharton. Tershawn Wharton is 26 years old. He had 6.5 sacks in 2024 in the regular season. He had 2 sacks in the playoffs. He had one in the AFC Championship against the Bills. He had one as well against the Houston Texans. Wharton was one of the only good players for the Chiefs in Super Bowl 59 against the Eagles. Like, I thought he did a really good job on Saquon Barkley. He might have been one of not the best players for Kansas City in that game. And so he's in his prime. This is a pass rushing specialist at defensive tackle. Again, 6.5 sacks last year in the regular season, 8.5 total when you combine the playoffs. He's going to be a lot cheaper than Milton Williams. Like, he's not going to be super cheap, but he's not someone that's going to command, 20 plus million a year like Milton Williams is. And so is he Milton Williams? No. He's a little bit of a downgrade, but he's a really good pass rushing defensive tackle, an overall 3-down player that I think, along with the potential rise of Moro Ijoma and Jordan Davis and potentially a draft pick, I think that's a really good addition to add to a rotation. Again, it's an ascending player that you're getting at his prime, and he's right now not going to command the top tier money that Milton Williams is. So if they do lose Milt, I think Tershawn Wharton from the Chiefs is a good idea. And I went with the same kind of idea at edge rusher. So the Eagles do have Nolan Smith still in-house. They have Jalix Hunt. Edge rusher is something I really want to address in the draft. I love the group this year for edge and defensive tackle. But they do want to be 4 deep in this rotation. And if Brandon Graham and Josh Sweat are gone, they need to add 2 guys to rotate in with Smith and Hunt. So who could be those players? I did add one free agent that, again, is an ascending young player that you're going to get, I think, cheaper than normal because he did have a season-ending injury last year, and he might want to sign a 1-2-year prove-it deal with a good team and then cash in next offseason or the one after that. And so I brought in former Las Vegas Raiders edge rusher, and he actually played in my backyard at the University of Buffalo, Malcolm Kuntz. Malcolm Kuntz, like Tershawn Wharton, is only 26 years old. He's in his prime. 2 years ago in 2023, he had a career year with 8 sacks. Again, he is coming off a season-ending injury from September, but he will, so by that timeline, he'll be ready to go for all of the Eagles' offseason workouts. He'll be healthy for, when free agency comes around, when it comes time for that new contract. Malcolm Kuntz is a guy, again, that's on the rise. Max Crosby hyped him up this past offseason saying, that's a guy you want on your football team. And again, he's going to be a lot cheaper than a Josh Sweat. Like, this is a player that you can take advantage of. It's low risk, high reward, right? He's not going to cost you Bryce Huff money. He's a good young player. And what you don't need, like, your top edge rusher. Like, this isn't like Bryce Huff. When you were signing Bryce Huff, it was to replace Hassan Reddick. You didn't know still what Nolan Smith was going to be. Like, Bryce Huff was supposed to be, like, the go-to guy getting the quarterback, even potentially, I think, over Josh Sweat, right? He was the guy they paid. They let Reddick go. They brought Josh Sweat back on a 1-year deal. Like, it was Bryce Huff. That's not what they're going to ask of Malcolm Kuntz. They have Nolan Smith, who's their alpha. Jalix Hunt is coming off an incredible playoff run, a year 2 potential breakout star. They have a really good draft class to choose from as well coming up. Malcolm Kuntz is going to be that 3rd or 4th guy in the rotation. And again, he's in his prime. He had 8 sacks 2 years ago. And I don't think he's going to want to cash in this offseason. I think he's going to want to sign a prove-it deal to I think, rise his market next year, his market value. And what better way to do that than sign with the Super Bowl champions in the Philadelphia Eagles? So those are two of the key free agents that I brought back. Tershawn Wharton from the Chiefs on the interior, and then Malcolm Kuntz, the former Raiders edge rusher. I did make one more big free agent move that we can get into, and this one maybe is more of a heart signing than a head signing, but I do think it makes logical sense for the Eagles on the field. You guys know I'm a sucker for a good reunion with an Eagles legend. I am bringing back at the tight end position Zack Ertz. I'm bringing Zack Ertz back, and I'm not sure if Ertz would be interested in this because I think he does want to run it back with the Commanders, where he was the starting tight end, had over 600 yards last year, over 60 receptions, 7 touchdowns. Like, Ertz did have a bounce-back year. He's 34. He still feels like he's got a lot of football left in him. I think he'd probably want to go somewhere where he gets more opportunities, whereas in Philly, you're buried behind Smith, Brown, Saquon, and Goddard for the ball. But at the same time, I just remember watching Zack Ertz walking off the field at the Link during the NFC Championship and still seeing like the sadness that he lost. But I think the sadness in his face was more so that he was missing being on that team and missing out on those moments. I feel like there was a part of him that wishes that he could still be, he thinks he should still be there, right? I think he thinks in another life, like he's still in Philadelphia. He's still a good player that should have been here throughout his entire career, but because of Dallas Goedert, he wasn't. And that was what I saw in his face was, damn, like, I can't believe I'm missing out on this. Like, I should still be here doing this. And I wonder if he, like, yes, he'd have to sacrifice a lot of numbers and money. But to come back for your old team and potentially win another championship at 34 years old, maybe Zack Ertz would consider doing it. Like, he was open to a reunion, the idea of a reunion in 2023. So maybe he's still open to it. I'm not sure, but I think it would be a really good idea. That's a solid tight end 2 behind Dallas Goedert. Again, Zack Ertz had 7 touchdowns last year. He had over 100 receiving yards and over 10 catches in the NFC title against the Eagles. Like, he gave the Eagles defense fits. Put him behind Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert misses a month of football every single year. Zack Ertz can be your starter when Dallas does go down. That's a really good 5th or 6th option along with Jahan Dotson, a big-time possession receiver, great hands. We know about Zack Ertz. I don't have to explain to you who Zack Ertz is as a player. A red zone threat, really good on third down, can be another guy that can help Jalen Hurts throw over the middle of the field. I think this is not just, Lou being Lou, bring back Deshaun Jackson and LaShawn McCoy and every Eagle that's ever been an Eagle. I'm not doing this for nostalgia. I genuinely think it makes a ton of sense. And if Zack Ertz would prioritize legacy, championships, coming home, he keeps saying how much he loves Philadelphia still, then this would make some sense. He'd have to sacrifice for sure. It would be mostly the balls in his court. For the Eagles, though, I do think a reunion with Zack Ertz makes a ton of sense. It makes a ton of sense. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we wrap up our offseason simulation with a mock draft, rounds 1 through 7, coming up next. All right, we are hard at work with our 2025 offseason simulation right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, going through in-house free agency, signing some UFAs, brought in Chiefs defensive tackle Tershawn Wharton, Raiders edge rusher Malcolm Kuntz, and a reunion with Eagles legend, Commanders tight end currently, Zack Ertz. So those are 3 of my notable free agent signings that I made for Philadelphia. But I do think when it comes to long-term and short-term replacements for some of these players that are departing in free agency, Howie Roseman talked about it today at the Combine. A lot of young players are going to have to step up and play more, just like they did last year. And some of those guys are already on the team, like, Moro Ijoma, Jordan Davis, Jalix Hunt, potentially Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Kelee Ringo. There's a lot of guys, Tyler Steen. However, the draft is going to bring in some of those players as well that have to replace guys. And that's the avenue that I'm looking at more for the Eagles this year to add instant contributors. Because when you look at the strength of this class, it's at the spots the Eagles need not just long-term help, but immediate help as well. The meat and potatoes is what this draft is great at, offensive and defensive linemen. And that's what the Eagles need. They need a starting right guard next year if Mekhi Becton leaves. They're going to need another edge rusher in the rotation if Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham are gone, if Milton Williams is gone. I like Moro Ujoma and Jordan Davis, but they need more at that spot. I brought in Tershawn Wharton in this simulation, but I think they could use another body there as well to potentially compete with Thomas Booker for snaps. So let's go through what I did with my mock draft, playing the role of Howie Roseman. Again, defensive line was the focus for me. And I felt like with Malcolm Koonce, like that's a solid third or fourth guy in this rotation. Jalix Hunt, I think, can break out next year. But I want even more. Like this, I was trying to make a splash on the edge. So I actually made a trade. I saw that this guy was falling outside the top 15. And I could see this happening because I don't think people know, kind of like Cooper DeJean last year and Brian Branch the year before, and this happens a lot with versatile players. Sometimes teams don't know where to put them, don't know where they project at the NFL level, and instead of seeing that as a strength, they see it as a head case, as a weakness, and they don't want to deal with it, so that kind of talent drops down the board. I think that could happen with a guy that goes to a school Howie Roseman loves to draft from, Georgia. It's Jalen Walker. I saw Jalen Walker falling past the top 15, so I traded up from pick 32 to pick 18 to select edge rusher Jalen Walker. Howie gets himself another Bulldog. And I think this pick would make all the sense of the world. This is the kind of player that I want for this defense. I'm not comparing him to Micah Parsons, but it's that kind of player. He's a tweener that plays both inside linebacker and edge rusher. He lined up all over the formation at Georgia. Like he was their jackal. He was their Swiss Army knife that you just didn't know where he was going to come from, blitzing through the A-gap as middle linebacker, as a stand-up. Then he would line up as a stand-up on the edge. Jalen Walker is a guy that I think projects more as just a edge rusher than a stand-up inside linebacker, but he can do both. And I want to have more versatile pieces on defense. Like you have a Cooper DeJean that can be a corner safety hybrid, a nickel linebacker. Now let's get a guy that you could just have get after the quarterback in so many different ways, like a Jalen Walker. And then boom, you have Nolan Smith, Jalen Walker, Jalix Hunt, and Malcolm Koonce as a really young, deep, high upside four-man rotation on the edge. I think if he falls past the top 15, Howie Roseman, go get that kind of player. Like that's the next kind of personnel addition I want for this defense. I want that versatile, like linebacker / edge rusher tweener. Like he's a player I think Vic Fangio could have a field day with. And I think he would be really like in obvious passing situations. Like you can have Jalix Hunt and Nolan Smith out there, and you could line Jalen Walker next to Zack Baun. And then you can have him rush from that spot from all over the place. And I think he's a really interesting player. I'd like to add that kind of talent to Philadelphia and just keep adding Georgia Bulldogs. Like I think that's a strategy that's been working for Howie Roseman, and I think that continues. How did I get him? I traded up from pick 32. I gave up a third rounder this year, and I gave up a second round pick in 2026. But I did recoup a third round pick as I moved down from this year's second rounder. I moved down from pick 64 to pick 84. So I moved down 20 spots, but I did collect an additional third round pick in 2026. So I lost a second rounder next year to get Jalen Walker, but I do have still that first round pick, and I have 3 third rounders. So I still have 4 picks inside the first 3 rounds next year. And I got Jalen Walker. I kind of prioritize quality over quantity here, but I really like that player for the Eagles and what they need. So I had to wait 20 more spots going down from round 2 to round 3 for my next pick. But with that 84th selection, I added another member of the Stout University. It's Georgia right guard Dylan Fairchild. Yep, I'm going back to the Bulldogs. The trend continues. Howie Roseman, hey, it hasn't hurt them. It's only helped them drafting players from Georgia. It helped them win a championship this year. Keep that strategy going. So I brought in Dylan Fairchild to compete with Tyler Steen for that starting right guard spot, as I did let Mekhi Becton go. Fairchild is definitely a raw talent right now, but he's got the power. He's got the length. He's elusive. Like he does have the movement skills to get up to the second and third level. He has the inside-out versatility where I think he could play any position. He can play center. He could play guard. I think Jeff Stoutland can really, if he gets his hands on a guy like Fairchild, another raw talent, he can be a starter at this level maybe as a rookie, but maybe you have Tyler Steen starting first, and then Fairchild takes over eventually, maybe in year 2. But I like the traits a lot, and I think you want to add, if you lose Mekhi Becton, I'm confident in Tyler Steen more than most, but I do think the Eagles would want to bring in some competition. But again, I just trust Stoutland, and as much as I'd like to have Becton back, I think you bring in a second or third round pick alongside Tyler Steen. I think you're going to be fine there. Again, you're paying 4/5 of your offensive line eventually when Cam Jurgens gets an extension. You're paying 4/5 of your offensive line top 5, top 10 contracts. Like, I don't think you can do that with all 5 guys. So I went more inexpensive here with a third round pick, the 84th selection, Georgia right guard Dylan Fairchild. So yep, I took 2 Georgia players with my first 2 picks, Jalen Walker and Dylan Fairchild. My next pick was at 120 in round 4. I know I added Zack Ertz at tight end, but I went with another tight end out of Clemson, Jake Briningstool. Briningstool is tall. He's athletic, a good possession receiver, really good hands, pretty sneaky athleticism when it comes to mobility or run after the catch ability. He is a lot lighter, though. Like, this is not a guy that probably is going to line up in a 3-point stance a lot and block. But I kind of like that because you have Zack Ertz and Dallas Goedert for that. He can be that receiver, tight end tweener that can compete with Johnny Wilson for snaps. Johnny Wilson was a really good, reliable blocker last year, but the guy has drop issues, and you saw it again in the Super Bowl. He had a bad drop in the Super Bowl. Bring in some more competition, another tall target for Jalen Hurts. Can compete with Grant Calcaterra as well, another potential red zone threat that can play above the rim. Briningstool, not again a super physical tight end, but solid, sneaky athleticism, run after the catch ability, a really good catch radius, has soft hands, good at finding the soft spots of zone. I like Jake Briningstool from Clemson with that 120th pick in the 4th round. And then I had 3 more selections here. So with the 162nd pick in round 5, I went with Ole Miss defensive tackle J.J. Pegues. Pegues, I should say. J.J. Pegues, this is a guy that the Eagles would like. If they continue this trend of going with upside traits, developing players that are newer to a position, like Jalix Hunt, who's a safety that transitioned to edge, I think J.J. Pegues is someone that makes sense. He was a tight end that transitioned over to defensive tackle, and he has that explosiveness. Like, he has the athleticism. He is someone that I think you need to refine more as a run stopper, but he's got the pass rushing prowess that you could develop behind Ajoma, Davis, Carter, Wharton in this scenario as that 5th guy to compete with Thomas Booker. If they are going to continue to go with traits and upside at the end of drafts like they continue to do year after year, J.J. Pegues from Ole Miss I think makes a lot of sense. And then I rounded out this mock draft with 2 final picks, one in round 5 and one in round 6. I brought in a physical running back to complement Saquon Barkley and Will Shipley. Miami running back Damian Martinez, a one-cut runner, but he's physical, gets downhill. I kind of want to add some size if Kenneth Gainwell is gone this year, and I think Martinez makes a lot of sense. And then my final pick to potentially replace Avonte Maddox, get some more nickel depth, USC cornerback Jalen Smith. So there you go. There in a nutshell is what I would do if I was Howie Roseman as the general manager this year. My offseason simulation is complete. By the way, I did say I would address Bryce Huff. I did end up as well trading Bryce Huff to the Arizona Cardinals, so I recouped another draft pick in 2026. I just think with Hunt, Smith, Walker in this scenario, and Malcolm Kuntz, there's just no room for Huff. Try to get out of that contract as a post-June 1st trade designation, free up a little bit of money, give him a fresh, change of scenery. I just don't think Vic Fangio trusts him. He was inactive in the playoffs most of the time, and I think they're just going to add other guys that are going to play ahead of him. So I know how he said there's still a chance that Huff, he's not giving up on that move yet, but I think that was more just to maybe raise his trade value. So that's what I did with Bryce Huff. But there you go. There's my offseason simulation for 2025. Let me know what you guys think. What moves would you do different? Which ones did you like? Hit us up on X and on our YouTube community page and let us know. I'll post all of these on the page so you can check them out. But that's going to do it for now. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.